A few months ago, I returned to playing the Pokémon TCG. I'm a pretty competitive person, so essentially straight away, I wanted to understand what all of the meta relevant decks were doing in the standard format and understand what I could do to beat them. I kept coming into a somewhat frustrating situation in which I wasn't even sure what my opponent was actually doing in a given game. In order to remedy this issue, I put together this spreadsheet, what I called my Pokemon TCG Metagame Nexus. Basically, it's just a list of all the meta-relevant decks and a bunch of information about the specific archetype. Also, importantly, it explains or outlines what each deck is trying to do in a game. For me, this was very helpful because I no longer, once I'd filled this out and input all of the information, I no longer was confused about what my opponent might be trying to do in a certain matchup. And even, of course, I still don't win every game or anywhere near that. I am much more confident in my understanding of what all of the different decks are trying to do and therefore what my strategy should look like in a game. And it's paid off in terms of success on the TCG Live ladder. The most recent season that just finished, going into the Pitch Black set release, was the second full one that I've played through since returning in around April. I came back to playing the Pokemon TCG and I got up to 1780 ELO. And I actually believe I could have gotten higher, but I decided to stop playing Dragapult EX, the deck that I had basically one-tricked and just grinded. Once I got past initially like picking back the basics up of the game, I just decided to just play Dragapult. But I decided once I got to that, I got kind of bored of it and I wanted to try the hardest deck, so I've just been playing Zoroark. But nevertheless, this is incredibly helpful. This is a copy that I'm going to make public for you guys. I'm going to put in the description of this video and also I'll pin it in a comment so you can construct your own Metagame Nexus spreadsheet. It's very important that you do this for yourself. Of course, all of the information here for the most part is available on sites such as Limitless and Trainer Hill, but it's important that you input this information for yourself. It's kind of rote learning and you will have an actual understanding, just like a teacher at school would get you to actually write out notes and not just explain the information. If you just mindlessly read this stuff, it really might not click. But I believe writing this out for yourself is definitely worth the it's quite a minimal investment. All in all, it should only take you maybe a couple of hours to get through the top 10 or 15 so decks. I've got all of them listed here, and there's plenty more in these drop down sections over on the A column here, all of the decks in the current metagame. So this is what the one that I have done for myself looks like. I'm not going to be sharing this one because some of the information is outdated. As I said, the second reason is because I believe it's important to do this for yourself. And the third reason is that it has information specific to the decks that I'm playing personally. So the information is probably just not accurate and for the most part relevant for what you might be doing and for your needs as a player. So this is the public copy. It's got, first of all, some basic information columns about a deck of Pokemon cards, such as the energy count that the lists generally run. Potential switching cards, I think, is important to take into account. A deck's ability to get a Pokemon in and out of the active is very important. Depending on your strategy, you might employ a retreat locking strategy in Pokemon TCG. It's pretty reasonable and it's a pretty common strategy. And it's also just important to know switching cards that your opponent could play to get out of certain situations and how mobile their Pokemon are. The stadiums, of course, there's like a war within a war in every match, which is the stadium war. Some decks, such as Festival Lead, for example, without the stadiums, it's not a very effective deck at all. So it's important to understand how important your opponent's stadiums are when you're playing, and therefore how important your own stadiums that you might run are, whether you can in some matchups discard them. Whereas in other matchup, like off the top of my head, I would say maybe against Hide and Sneak, the stadiums that you use are not so important because I'm pretty sure they just run like Prism Tower at the moment, but that's just an example. Hand disruption cards, always important. The top decks run very significant hand disruption cards. The A-spec in most Dragapult lists is the unfair stamp, and most lists run at least some hand disruption, so that's important to take note of. Recovery cards such as Night Stretcher, Lana's Aid, Sacred Ash, those cards that can get resources out of the discard, it's important to understand if your opponent can generally be expected to be able to do that, because then if you remove resources from your opponent, or if they burn resources early on, it's important to know whether that's actually meaningful or whether that's something that your opponent can do with reckless abandon because they run a lot of recovery. Techs, pretty self-explanatory. Unusual cards that most lists don't run, or even if they do, it's maybe not their main strategy. For example, Dragapult at the moment is teching Moltres a lot to help with the Excadrill matchup. And if decks want to deal with Shaymin, then they would deal with Slowking, then they would tech Shaymin. There's a couple of examples, of course. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you know what a tech card is in a Pokemon deck. How they win, this is the most important, in my opinion, column of this whole guide. It's understanding specifically what your opponent is actually trying to do in general, and also if you play certain decks specifically, it's probably good to include a section on what they're trying to do against your deck specifically if that changes. Once you understand this, you will never be in that spot that I described before where you don't even know what your opponent is trying to do. Early on, it could be very overwhelming if your opponent is not, just playing like a beat stick deck that is just trying to kill you through the active, or just take a bunch of prizes and win the prize race. More intricate strategies, control strategies, strategies that rely on the size of your opponent's hand or your hand size, such Alakazam does damage output based on their hand size. Mega Frostlass does damage based on your hand size if you're playing against it. It's important to know what all of these different decks are trying to impact on the game, how they're trying to get the game state to be in order for them to win, because it's not always so straightforward. Weaknesses, that's fairly straightforward. Things that decks in general can do to beat the certain archetype, and also specifically what your deck could do against it. Energy acceleration cards. Some decks don't run any energy acceleration. Some decks, it's a very big part of how they win. And then finally, I just have a general notes column where I would usually, in this section, write stuff specific to the certain decks that I'm playing, although I would kind of include some of that throughout the entire document when I'm filling this out. So, as I said, I'm going to make this available in the description, completely free. It's like a public copy. You can click File and then make a copy. You can make your own copy of this, and it's something that you can continue to update as new sets are released. You can update your understanding. You can go on limitless.com or you can go on Trainer Hill. Those are the two sites that I've used to get the kind of basic information for all of this, and update your understanding of the tech cards, energy counts, stadiums, etc. that different decks are running. And therefore, you can have a much greater understanding of what each meta-relevant deck is trying to do and what you can do to beat the deck. Or potentially, you could find a deck that you actually enjoy playing from this list, and you're going to have a much greater understanding off the whip of what it's actually trying to do and whether that even appeals to you.